hold this a little further away. All right, so here's how this is going to go. We have about 40 minutes left, so thanks for hanging with us. I think this is one of the most important pieces of today. Maybe it's also because I work on policy, but I think that there are many, many people in this world who are fabulous scientists, and there are many, many people in this world who are very good policymakers. Sometimes bridging the gap between policy and science is really hard. They have two fundamental different purposes. In that scientists' funding mechanisms are designed in such a way that you are constantly looking for the next question, because that's how you get funded. In the policy world, we are constantly looking at how we use the best available science to better inform our decision making, to design better policy. And so there has traditionally been a disconnect between those two worlds, and there are a handful of people who are really, really good at bridging that gap, 4 of whom are sitting up here today. And so we're going to talk a little bit about how we bridge that gap and how we can be better, how we can be more effective with the climate policy nexus. But first I'm going to have them introduce themselves because they'll do a better job than I will, and we'll just go on down the line.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Tarn. I'm Alice Madden. I am currently the director of the Getches Wilkinson Center for Natural Resources, Energy, and the Environment at the CU Law School. I know a lot of you from when I was in the legislature. I served in the early 2000s. I became majority leader. I served as the Worth Chair in Sustainability at CU Denver. I worked in the Obama administration at the Department of Energy, and now I'm at CU. Hopefully helping teach some of the next generations of water leaders.
Is this on? Yeah. Thank you, guys, back there. I'm Jim Lockhead. I'm the CEO of Denver Water.
Enough said. John?
I don't know whether I can be that short. My name's John Stolp. I'm a former Commissioner of Agriculture and most recently, Water Policy Advisor to Governor Hickenlooper.
I am Mark Sponsler. I serve a few thousand farmers in the state as Executive Director for the Colorado Corn Growers Association and the Colorado Corn Administrative Committee. We invest in research, market development, promotion, education, and occasionally try to influence policy.
All right, so thank you all for being here and for your participation. So we're going to start just with a couple of questions, and I'll leave it to you guys. We don't have to go down the line. We don't have to be in any specific order. Some of you may have more to say on one question than another, so you can just jump in based on the question and what you have to say. So as I was saying earlier, climate change has traditionally been a hard topic to integrate with policy. So why should we be thinking about incorporating climate change into policy and decision making, and what are some of the challenges and more specifically, what are some of the opportunities in doing so? Anyone want to start?
Sure, I'll start. Well, to me, it's pretty simple, and that is that the entire world is changing out from under us because of climate change. And we have systems, processes, regulations that are in place that are based on static models and assumptions that the future is going to look like the past. So if you look at the Colorado River Compact, for example, or other interstate allocations, or if you look at our water rights system in Colorado, both of those are based on assumptions of hydrology that were presumed to last indefinitely into the future. If you look at water quality regulation, for example, it's based on stream flow, stream quality parameters that are based on current conditions, as opposed to a situation where water bodies are going to be warming and all those constituencies are going to change as a result. So somehow we need to incorporate some of the planning concepts of dealing with uncertainty into our water allocation structure and figure out some way for there to be some flexibility because, for example, again, the entire water rights administration regime is going to change as stream flow patterns change, runoff patterns change, reservoirs fill differently, crop demands continue to go up, and we basically see potentially less water in the streams and almost certainly more rain and less snow in the future.
I wanted to add just kind of the political realities around this. I think water policy is sort of an innocent bystander to the other climate change fight that's happening really in the energy world. And climate change science has been, bashed, and and some people won't even say those words. I joke resiliency is the safe word for climate. But 10 years ago, I don't know if any of you remember this, the Red Couch campaign. It was a climate change campaign. Nancy Pelosi and Newt Gingrich sitting on a red couch together on a beach, so it would catch your attention, talking about climate change. Even better, Al Sharpton and Pat Robertson sitting on a red couch talking about climate change. That was 2008. And then a real effort to, sort of diminish the legitimacy of climate science started after that. So again, I think water law is on a little bit different track, but I think that also still adds to some of the slowness of actually acting.
Taryn, just to refresh, we're talking challenges and opportunities here. All right, thanks. I have a short attention span, so bear with me. And I'm out of breath. I think I'd like to start off by just pointing out that agricultural production, survival in the world of agricultural production has for many generations, for many centuries, depended on a producer's ability to adapt to that which is uncertain. And in almost any farming enterprise, a producer has to make probably 100 management decisions before knowing what the environmental factors are going to be in the course of a production year. So this situation is not new, but I think the challenge, of course, that would seem intuitive is producers have to be ready to adapt to a wider range of climate variability, and I believe that they're very in tune with that. That's a normal part of the business. Yet the extremes that we anticipate, as Jim pointed out, related to water supply, certainly the thousands of environmental factors that affect the production of crop and livestock, particularly crops, they're likely to be a greater swing. That said, I think the opportunities lie in the fact that today we are at a dramatically different place in being able to adapt, in being able to maybe not predict, but be able to fine-tune the management choices that allow them to be responsive. For example, timing of every input. We have, if a producer can afford it, there's an amazing range of tools available that allow them to prescriptively, both in place and time, manage the inputs, be it water, nutrients, crop protection compounds. So that element, those resources for producers are ramping up at a dramatic pace, and they have been on a fast pace over the last 20 years. So that's the good part. Another challenge is that they cost money to implement, but that may be a place where there's opportunity for collaboration as well.
A couple of comments I would add is we've dealt with around the policy realm and talking about climate change. It's been interpreted by different sectors in different ways, and so sometimes we have to go to the person or the individual or the industry to explain, what's in their best interest, to be looking at the different policy changes we may need to be considering when it comes to climate change. And to build off of some of what Mark had just mentioned, when I was Commissioner of Ag, we had a program that was to sequester carbon. And farmers were very interested because they were doing some things called no-till and places like that, things like that had an opportunity for them to get additional revenue and to save them money in some cases. And so it's kind of interesting how you have to deal with people in different ways, because had we said, because of climate change, we want you to do this, this, and this, and that would have been pushed, been a strong resistance to that. But when we look at things and how do we conserve moisture, how do we conserve, at the same time conserving carbon, lower emissions, we had a whole lot different response. And that's true whether it's in the agriculture community or I think water provider community. Being in the policy office, I've seen considerable change in people's attitude, similar to what Denver Water's been doing, that they're embracing climate change and being able to educate people as to why they need to do the certain things they need to do. It saves their bottom line, makes them more resilient, and it still maintains a quality of life here. And so I think sometimes we have to be fairly creative how we incorporate the terminology of climate change into and meet people wherever they're at.
Thank you, I agree. Soil health, everybody loves soil health, right? I mean, it saves water, it gives you higher crop yields, and it keeps carbon in the ground, right? It's like the trifecta. John and Mark, this wasn't on the list of questions, so I'm blindsiding you here, but it kind of ties into what Alice said about climate change getting intertwined with the energy world. And as we shift our energy portfolio and as we see the incorporation of more renewables, there's actually been opportunities for the agricultural communities in rural areas where we've put in either utility scale wind farms or individual wind turbines. Can you talk a little bit about, I'm going to use all the catchphrases in one question, can you talk a little bit about how being part of that climate change mitigation piece can actually act as a resilient component of an agricultural business as far as bringing in diversified revenue?
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons why. I mean, that positive factor, Taryn, is part of the reason why we are not seeing more obvious suffering in terms of equity loss of Colorado's rural landscape. I can tell you that it is significant, and it is a challenge. And if it weren't, I would dare say that if it weren't for the wind farms, the oil and gas exploration, the increased price of grain as a result of renewable energy such as ethanol, we would be seeing a disastrous economy in rural Colorado. And by the way, we all depend on that because even though we don't see, where the food and clothes and resources that come from agriculture, we don't see that process, and generally people are more removed from that process, more generations than probably ever before. It is absolutely essential to every citizen, not only in Colorado but the U.S. But I'm very concerned about our current state of low commodity prices, and you're absolutely right. It's that additional revenue that is mitigating the bleeding going on in rural Colorado and rural America.
I'd also add to that I think some of the technology that we have had available to agriculture over the last couple decades has really made a change. We're kind of survivalist in that had I continued to farm the same way my father-in-law farmed over the last 40 years, I'd have been broke. a couple decades ago. And so there's been a financial incentive also to change to our operations. We're primarily a dryland, a wheat and livestock operation, but we're able to, I wish I knew 40 years ago what I know today, or at least my son knows today, on how we can get squeeze more out of each drop of water in a farming situation, and than we did before. We wasted more water when we were plowing and some things like that. We're doing no-till. We have the technology of new hybrids and new genetics that have been able to actually consume 30% less water, respond to fertility in a more efficient way. We have precision agriculture. While there's a big price that goes with it initially, it's helped us reduce our petroleum consumption by probably 50%. It's helped us cut down on the cost of fertilizer because of precise application by 10 to 15%. And so there's some incentives out there to do the right thing by the climate that also goes to the bottom line. And it's back to what Mark said earlier, being able to adapt to a changing climate is as important for a farmer as for a water utility. Because we know by all the information we've seen earlier in this presentation today at the Water Congress that chances are the pattern's changing, and we're going to have less water to deal with, whether we're a farmer or whether we're a utility.
Thank you. So we've talked a lot about uncertainty today, and uncertainty is often seen as a barrier to integration of proactive policy. And Jim, I'd love to hear your perspective, because Denver Water has done such a great job both grappling with the uncertainty, but then also making decisions in the face of it. So my question is, why should climate change be any different than any other area that we're making decisions with uncertainty? And is there a framing component? How do we have those difficult discussions in such a way that people actually understand what we're talking about and can utilize that information?
Well, of course, water supply planning used to be pretty easy. As I said before, you would just assume that the future is going to look like the past, and so you could take past hydrology and just project it into the future, and you could take population trends and just project those into the future, and then there's a gap that's identified, and you just go out and find more water, and it's pretty easy. Obviously, things have changed, and we know that we're dealing with uncertainty, and in a sense, climate change is really not any different than the other uncertainties that we all deal with, whether it's the economy, whether it's social values, whether it's the way that land use is kind of consumes water across the landscape. All of those are factors that will change, from a utility perspective, our ability to provide water for our customers. So we've undertaken a process called scenario planning, which is premised on various future scenarios under different assumptions of uncertainty, be it climate change, social economic conditions, land use patterns, and all of that, and put ourselves in a position or a challenge of being able to provide secure water supply, or at least understand the risks that we're dealing with under each one of those different scenarios. One of the things that we do know about climate change is that the Earth has been getting warmer, and for the foreseeable future will continue to get warmer. So we can think about what the implications of that will be and try and understand what the effects of that are going to be on our system. Again, whether it's earlier snow melt, whether it's an increased risk of catastrophic wildfire, whether it is increased demands within our service area, a whole host of different things that we can plug into those different scenarios that will inform our decisions going forward. The other thing that we've done in response to uncertainty is to reevaluate our capital project delivery process. Again, in the good old days, engineers would, if an asset failed and we had to replace it, they would just simply replace it in kind and maybe bolster it with additional capital resiliency, or they may oversize certain facilities. And I think in the face of all the uncertainty that we face, we're re-looking at first of all whether we will build something in kind. We'll re-look at the asset and question whether we need it, what the problem is we're trying to solve. Secondly, we are emphasizing modularity and flexibility in terms of our capital processes. So, for example, our treatment plants, we're looking at building smaller and more flexibly to be able to adjust how we treat water in the future and where we treat water in the future, whether, for example, it could be more distributed treatment as opposed to in large treatment plants. We're also utilizing our integrated resource plan that's based on the scenario planning to inform that capital planning process. So, for example, climate change may affect demands in our system as well as growth, and that will impact the size and amount and location of treated water storage, or conduit sizes and distribution line sizes. As our customers become more efficient, obviously that's going to reduce demands and also change the diurnal pattern of demands in our system. So even though there's a lot of uncertainty out there, we try to understand what the implications of that uncertainty might mean, what the risks might be, and that allows us, as we do planning in the more short term, whether it's 5 or 10 years out, we can be a little more predictive in terms of what's going to happen, as opposed to just in the 50 or 60 years in the future, what those various scenarios might mean.
Thank you. Alice, what about you? You come from a little bit of a broader perspective, but you've been on both sides of the coin. You've been the policy maker and the policy implementer in a whole host of different roles. What are some of the strategies you've utilized, and how have you messaged it to make it more palatable?
I just ran into my old friend Dick Bratton out in the hallway. So I have a very funny story about, which I won't tell now, maybe over a beer, my first visit to the Water Congress in 2001 with a really stupid bill. So I'll tell you that story later. Dick kind of saved me that day. Water law, from my perspective, being in the legislature, obviously doesn't break down on Democratic versus Republicans. There's different stakeholders with completely different interests. So it's not like other topics. It's not like housing or, and so, some of the social issues we deal with. And it also moves really, policy changes in water move more slowly than I think anything else I can think of. The Water Congress had a reputation of having 100% kill rate of bills. If they didn't like a bill, it died. It didn't go anywhere. A year or two ago, I guess a couple years now, everyone was so excited a rain barrel bill passed. Woo! That's great, but I think about how slowly it moves, and in some cases, I think people are willing to go to water court. It's the devil they know. They can, negotiate and settle in court. Why bring the legislature, who doesn't know as much as you do about it, into your business? I totally get that. With climate change and what's approaching, I think that just has to change, because there has to be some big picture, long-term planning. You don't get to fudge water numbers. It's either there or it's not. So I think folks who work in water, they're dealing with science every day and real data. But it's, we're in a new normal, and a normal that's actually going to get worse. So somebody, an entity like the Water Congress can be so instrumental in bringing stakeholders together. And everyone comes with their own, bias, and they're representing their client or where they come from. So an organization like this that can take a bigger picture is so important. You have legislators who have 8-year term limits, and they maybe don't even hang out for that long. They can go be a county commissioner, make 3 times as much. So you have turnover in the legislature. You have staff now that's very more powerful because they've been around longer. And you have folks in the lobby who are powerful. So I can understand why there's some hesitancy around going to the legislature, but I think it's going to take and we have, obviously a new governor. There's going to be new folks on boards and commissions. By the end of the summer, things might look a little differently. This is a great opportunity. And when you work in climate change, you have to stay positive or you won't get out of bed in the morning. So this is a great opportunity to think about how things might change and some bigger picture planning can come. You obviously deal in this and you have to be able to provide water for your constituencies. You're thinking longer term. But for across the state, it's going to take some wrangling to get everybody in a room and think about some bigger picture versus, I represent this constituency, this is what I want. I think we're going to have people, think about what kind of Colorado do we look like. So that logo, there won't be a white dot up top in there. Pretty soon, it'll be brown. Think about that.
I don't think that qualifies as staying positive, Alice. Mark or John, do you have anything to add on that piece?
I would like to throw in a little policy perspective, realizing that I haven't addressed that too squarely so far. I think that it's reasonable to expect that both in Colorado and across the nation, there are likely to be fairly profound regional differences that particularly impact agricultural production. And you all know that we don't grow bananas or oranges in Colorado, at least not outside, right? And similarly, you don't find a whole lot of corn, wheat, or other staple commodity production in other certain states. So the kind of dramatic climate variability that we really ought to be bracing for, I think requires some policy cooperation, probably some planning in terms of, how are we going to assure that in the U.S. or in state we have the infrastructure in place to put the resources where they need to be, whether it be the electricity or the water, in order to produce these products, but also the infrastructure to manage the distribution of the output, and recognize that it may not be as convenient in any given year for any particular crop or commodity or energy input. So I think those are things that we have to take a step back and think very big picture. I think it extends beyond our borders of Colorado as well as beyond our national borders, recognizing that Starbucks would probably have a rough time if we were having difficulty getting coffee into the U.S., as well as every other shop within a quarter mile of each other. So we trade becomes a very trade policy becomes a very big factor, and we keep our eye to that, because in most of the commodities we deal in international markets. When Russia or Australia has a big wheat crop, it impacts prices in the U.S., in Colorado. Same with every other major commodity. We need to be building those relationships so that we're not stumbling over those kinds of barriers that are artificially in place when there is a need in country or out of country. So those are big picture things that we wrestle with, and we struggle with. How do we put ourselves as Coloradans and as U.S. citizens in a place to be most adaptive and most responsive.
Thank you. Yeah, I think in a global marketplace, a global issue like climate change really resonates across those political boundaries. And I think collaboration, especially, we live in a world right now where we are so quick to point fingers and assign blame. And I think one of the things that we keep coming back to today is collaboration is key to addressing this issue, because it's too complex to do on our own. So given that, CML does these roadshows around the state, and they hear from folks on the ground about what their biggest concerns are. And I think this year, the top 5, I'm going to do this off the top of my head. I think it was meth labs, opiate addiction, drought, housing costs, and I'm forgetting the fifth one. But these are pressing issues, right? You know, when we're talking about, it's suicide. When we're talking about suicide and opioid addiction and methamphetamine, you know, it's life or death, right? When we're talking about drought, okay, maybe you can draw a closer correlation with that and climate change. If you listened to Jeff this morning, hopefully you can. But given the context of these life and death issues that we're facing as a state, how does climate change fit into our overall state priorities? And how do we give it a voice so that we can address it in a meaningful way?
Let me make a couple comments on that. It is part of life and death because it's the food we eat, the air we breathe, and the water we drink. It's very important to our well-being and our quality of life here in Colorado. And we've really been pampered by all three being in abundance and pure and clean. And so it's sometimes hard, but to get the message across that why it's important not to be having too much greenhouse gas, for one thing, because the unintended consequences of that. And so it's a big educational effort because climate change and climate policy really becomes part of everything we do. Whether, you know, if we're going to get 2 or 4 degrees warmer over the next 50, 60 years, we ought to be incorporating some of those ideas into how we build future homes. And same way with how we take care of our landscapes. Are we going to be able to have the bluegrass lawns that we've had of the past? And so there's just a lot of those things that are an indirect way of addressing climate change in policy decisions. You know, the concern about and some of the medical studies been doing near greenhouse gas emissions and the health of young people and elderly people and that sort of thing. And so it ties together, but you can't do it in a 30-second spot either. And so that's why it's difficult in the policy arena to make sure that policy is well thought out, that there's not those unintended consequences I think that Mark was referring to, that they do help us, and sometimes they probably have to be regional because so oftentimes we see things from the EPA that decides we're going to address things in the West the same way we do the Chesapeake Bay or the Mississippi Delta. And so it comes back to the educational effort, and I've got to commend Denver Water on their water conservation messaging over the last several decades. And it's stuck with the rest of us, even though we don't buy water directly from you, Jim, but with our news media and outlets statewide, to only use what we need. And some of those things have really helped, I think, young people and us older people too, to understand that this water that we talk about is so precious, and the quality of it is also precious, as we're very pampered in this country with all these amenities, but there's a reason behind it. It's public policy, it's been regulation that's helped keep our water clean, it's helped keep our air clean, and we probably can do more.
So thanks for bringing the room down a little bit more. I mean, it's really, you know, you think about that, but thinking about how climate change and what policymakers can do, I know that seasonal economies are really tough on communities. You have people in and out of work, and there's studies that show that drug use, alcohol use, domestic violence all ebb and flow with things like that. So having a diverse economy is really important. I printed this out today. I was just curious. You've heard about the Green New Deal. A lot of that focuses on building more renewable energy and really talks about the jobs focus. It was almost hard to believe that this number is true, but 81% of all registered voters support the Green New Deal. I mean, because it's really about jobs and the economy. And that's what people across Colorado really need, is stable economy, education, opportunity. You know, we have one of the highest teen suicide rates in the country. We haven't been able to get our hands around that. But again, opportunity, feeling like you have a path forward, that's a huge thing. And again, that comes really back to education and economy.
Obviously, those are tremendously important issues, but in terms of life or death, I think we only need to look to the catastrophic wildfires that we've had in Colorado, Sandy, Katrina. If you look at the drought in California and literally communities, rural communities, poor rural communities in California that are completely without water supply in the wake of the California drought. Now, obviously, drought and extreme weather events have always happened, and they will always continue to happen, but certainly a warming climate exacerbates those events and causes property damage and loss of life. If you look long term at the Colorado River, the imbalance of supply and demand on the Colorado River is literally, I think, an existential threat to Colorado, and that the economy and you know, everything that Colorado is about. If we collectively, 7 basin states and the Department of the Interior, aren't proactively working on better management and sustainable management of the Colorado River. You know, if we are back to kind of a zero-sum game in terms of the traditional way that water works and water allocation works, we're not going to be equipped to be sustainable in the future, either within Colorado or certainly at a basin level. So I would argue that climate change and the implications of climate change are right up there with some of the biggest problems that we face as a society.
So with just a few minutes left, I'm going to throw one last question out there. Within the water world, we focus a lot on climate adaptation. We focus a lot on how do we do more with less. What role, if any, does the water community have in mitigating climate change, reducing overall greenhouse gas emissions, and how do you see that play out?
Well, I think, as you two indicated, reducing dependence on carbon is kind of just good business practice, and that certainly applies in terms of a water utility. Denver Water has a goal of we have a benefit of gravity in our system and hydropower, but we have a goal of being net energy neutral by 2020 in terms of all of our operations across our system, not just pumping, but vehicles and everything else. We are building a campus that will be the most sustainable campus that's ever been built in Colorado, with a LEED Platinum administration building, net zero energy, using heat exchange from our own water supply, doing rainwater capture. We filed a water right application to be able to do rainwater capture on our campus. We're building a treatment plant. We established a goal for this treatment plant to be off the grid, and the engineers looked at us like we were crazy. But if you think about a water treatment plant that is off the grid from a security standpoint, if the grid goes down and we're still able to treat water, that's a pretty darn good situation for our customers. They not only got that treatment plant to be able to be off the grid, but we actually are on the grid because we're going to be producing energy and selling energy back onto the grid as a result of this treatment plant. I'm not aware of another treatment plant in the world that has this kind of sustainability to it. So it's part of our responsibility, it's part of our ethic, but at the bottom line, it ultimately is going to save our customers money in terms of their rates, and is a message to them about the sustainability and the connection that they have to their water supply, as well as to the rest of the landscape in Colorado, including the agricultural community.
I think there's a saying, and I got it from John Hickenlooper. He said, sometimes we have to have a little adversity to cause us to get more efficient and to think differently. And so he said when he was in the brew pub business, you know, when things were going well, they got kind of fat and happy, I guess. And then when people stopped coming in the door, all of a sudden they decided they had to do things somewhat differently. And they actually started advertising with their competitors in order to get people to come down to Lodo and enjoy what was available down there. And so I think that's kind of like climate change and water sharing is we've had the adversity and we see it coming down the road. It's called climate change. It's called population increase. And so there's opportunities here for us to do things somewhat differently or a little bit differently than we have in the past. And we've seen in Colorado our municipals reduce their water consumption per capita by around 20%. And nobody's claiming that their quality of life has decreased any. We still have, what, 70, 80,000 people moving in net-wise every year. And so we have been adapting to this increased population. We still have a great quality of life, but education is going to be such an important part of that, whether it's on a farm in southeastern Colorado or whether it's in an apartment building here in the Denver area, that we've just got to learn more about the situation we're in, how climate change impacts us and what we can do, and then we can adapt. Individuals can adapt on their the food they buy, the vehicle they drive, the type of housing they purchase, all have an impact on their carbon footprint and oftentimes on their water footprint. So I think we have to just keep educating people as to what they can do individually and then what we can do collectively, and that's where policy can help put some of that in place after a thorough stakeholder process.
Yeah, Taryn, I'd just like to add, earlier I alluded to dramatic increase in the technology and the tools that are available. I don't want listeners to perceive that we think we've got it figured out. I think the only thing that's changing faster is the rate of change and the degree of need for continued research and learning how to apply these new tools in the most effective manner. John mentioned that we're fortunate in agriculture that the goal to survive economically is generally completely in line with maximizing efficiency of those inputs. So for any regulator in the room, it's okay. We're making great progress. No need to inflict a bunch of rules, but I think because I think that honestly, those farmers on the land that know their resources, know they have an intimate, specific relationship with each field and understand the limitations and the resources involved. They're the best. They're the best in the best position to know how to optimally manage that productivity of that land and the soil health and everything associated. That said, there is still dramatic need for investment in research, and I think that's another critical role for policy, recognizing that no land-grant university is fully funded on tuition, and certainly the kind of research that it takes is expensive, time-consuming, and we can't really afford to let up on that investment, and it's an investment that benefits everyone. So both state and federal dollars that can go into the kind of research that benefits all the citizenry, through agricultural research in terms of improved varieties, improved methods to manage that crop per drop, and it's a very significant need, and there's not enough resources within the agricultural community to carry that investment.
Sharing that data is so useful. Grand Canyon Trust grazes cattle in a place where you wouldn't think anything could even live, but they do, and they do a lot of studies on the soil and the rainfall and the crops or the vegetation the cows eat, and they share it, and they've become a really valuable resource for the folks who graze in the Southwest. And one of your last questions on our cheat sheet was how we frame this discussion, and I just want to end my comments on that. this can be really overwhelming and kind of depressing. And when you think about how you get people to act, you have to talk in solutions-based language. There has to be a path forward. It can't just be all doom and gloom and all the trees are dying and we're not going to have any water, because people just close up and they really can't listen anymore. There was an old salesman in the 1940s who said, "Don't sell the sausage, sell the sizzle." So think about, what our sizzle's going to be. What are the technologies that are going to help us? But think about all the different stakeholders that are involved with water policy in Colorado. Everyone's going to have a different viewpoint, and even to the language that people hear and digest, you can make someone quit listening to you within the first 10 seconds if you start off wrong. So really knowing your audience, meeting them where, in the place where they live, literally, thinking about what they care about, make everything you say relatable to them. What is the context that they care about every single day? And if it's not you, if you're just too much of an outsider, think about trusted messengers. Maybe it's an ag extension person from CSU, maybe it's the Pentagon, maybe it's Mike Nelson, the meteorologist. I mean, you have to think about who they're going to listen to, and if you say, well, Mike says this, they're like, oh, okay, I trust Mike. And only then can you really delve into what are the consequences of inaction. So bring people in a positive way that we're going to get here, but we need your help, and this is why you should care.
Thank you. I think that's a good stopping place. I think, Mark made some really good comments as well. I mean, you all made comments, but I can't summarize all your comments, so I'm just going to pull a couple. About looking to what's being done on the ground. I think oftentimes there are great examples, and sometimes it's about increasing the communication between what's happening on the ground and what's happening under the Gold Dome, and making sure that people are well informed, because that greater collaboration can lead to better solutions. And ultimately, we're not trying to check a box here. We're trying to create a more resilient, sustainable Colorado, that our kids and our grandkids are still going to have adequate water supplies and be able to work the land and enjoy Colorado the same way that we do. And policy has to be a part of that solution, and we have to embrace the uncertainty and the change going forward to find those solutions. So with that, if you can join me in thanking our panelists.